Good morning, everybody. This is Andrew Plato. I'm President and CEO of Anitian, and I want to welcome you to our joint webinar with ISACA Willamette Valley on the insider threat, building a multi-generational security program. Today we're going to be talking about really the future of your information security program and how to align it with the changing workforce that's going on today. So, with that, we'll go ahead and get started. I want to thank all of you for attending today on this snowy day here in Portland, Oregon. And also, at any time during this presentation, if you have any questions, use the question feature of GoToWebinar, and I'd be happy to answer those at the end. Okay. So let me take a second to introduce myself. I think a lot of you already know who I am, but if you don't, I'm, as I mentioned, I'm CEO of Anitian. I'm Andrew Plato. I've been in information security for about 22 years now. As many of you know, I got into this industry back in 1995. I was working at Microsoft at the time on one of the first e-commerce websites. And my job at that time was documenting databases, which is a really exciting and thrilling job, I might add. During my process of documenting databases, I copy and pasted a SQL query out of whatever tool we were using at the time into a browser window, and I hit enter, and of course the website processed the query and returned all the results. What I had done, and I didn't know this at the time, of course, was I had executed the first SQL injection attack. I took that knowledge, and over the next few weeks, I hacked a lot of sites. I tried out that technique on many different websites. In 1995, the internet was a lot more rudimentary, so those attacks were pretty much universally successful for sites that actually used a database. At some point in this process, I realized I was kind of onto something, so I went to the developers at Microsoft to show them what I had discovered. They were very dismissive, basically telling me to kind of go away. I tell this story because it's of course important to Anitian's history and my own experience, but it's also somewhat relevant to this presentation. This inability to kind of get people to understand what I'm talking about. This is a challenge we face in information security as a whole. Getting people to understand us and understand the gravity and the importance and the value of what we do. And the next generation security programs that we build, this is going to become all that much more important. So with that note, let me take also a second to introduce Anitian. Again, I believe most of you know who we are and what we do, but Anitian is a security intelligence provider. We believe at Anitian that security, information security, is essential for growth, innovation, and prosperity in any business. If you want to grow your business, if you want to get better at what you do, you need good information security. Security is an essential component. If you want to look at the history of humanity, all civilizations required security to grow. If you want to go the whole Maslow's hierarchy of needs approach, security is number 2 from the bottom. So we believe that security is a very essential component. And we also believe that the key to great security is to build great security leaders. And that's really what this presentation and pretty much all of our presentations are all about, helping you become better leaders. We deliver a whole series of services. So we have 4 primary branded practice areas. We have a risk assessment practice, Risk Now, which uses our innovative rapid risk assessment technique. We have a comprehensive compliance auditing practice called Vision Path. We offer comprehensive security testing, cloud security, AWS security called Ring Zero. And then we also offer managed security services, managed firewall, managed IDS, IPS, managed detection and response. So this is our Sherlock, managed threat intelligence services that we call. Okay, so one question for all of you who are listening today is really kind of what do you expect or want out of this presentation? This is a question I like to challenge all audiences that I speak to about is, are you looking for the truth or are you just looking to get some boxes checked? Because I pose this challenge really because this kind of gets to the essence of who we are at Anitian. If you want the truth, if you want a good idea, if you want if you really want to give some meat and bones, if you want to get to the truth of what's going on in your environment, that's what we're all about at Anitian. If you're just looking to get a box checked for compliance or whatever, that isn't what we do at Anitian. And don't get me wrong, I respect the fact that sometimes in business, that's kind of where you're at. You're just sort of like, look, I don't really care about the details, just check all the boxes and make it all go away. And I can respect that maybe that's where you're at and that's okay, but that isn't what we do. And that isn't really what this presentation is about. This presentation is about delivering truth and helping you become a better security leader. So with that, let's talk about what we are going to talk about in this presentation today. Ultimately, my intent is I want to help you build a better security program. I want to also help you prepare your security program for a demographic shift that, quite frankly, has already happened in some respects. And of course, the other dimension of this is that I want to demonstrate Anitian's value and provide value to you. So this presentation, a couple of pieces. First part, I want to sort of lay the groundwork for our hypothesis and why we're sort of presenting this. What's the reasoning behind our approach to this next generation security program? Then I want to talk about the generations in the workforce. Spend a little bit of time, and I think there's some key data points that are very relevant to understanding why it's becoming more challenging to engage the workforce. We'll talk about what the problem is, and then we'll get to the latter part of this presentation where I'm going to give you some strategies that you can implement right now and today to help you improve your security program. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and get started. We'll start with sort of the hypothesis. What's the basis for this entire presentation and sort of all of our thinking around this? So I begin with a quote from good old Charles Darwin, which the funny thing about this is actually not his quote. He actually never said anything like this. But it's sort of a summation of a lot of theories and concepts that Darwin had. And I start with this because, number one, it's a good quote. It's a good concept. It's a good scientific principle. But it really defines, I think, information security and a challenge that information security has today, which is this notion that it isn't about strength or really even intelligence that creates survivability. And I would say this is very true of information security, but it's about adaptability. So, if you want to go at it from the sort of the scientific perspective, this is what has allowed species, of course, to become successful. But we take this and we translate this notion into an information security perspective, and the same principle really applies. It's not about the strength of your program. It's not about how clever it is or how aligned it is. It's more about how adaptable it is, how quickly it can change and fit itself to the dynamic landscape of not only your organization and your workforce, but of course the threats that are changing out there. So with that hypothesis, we kind of move on to the next principle that we believe, which is that it's our belief at Anitian, and this is backed by plenty of good data, that human error is essentially the root of all breaches. Firewalls do not just wake up one day and say, I'm tired of blocking this traffic. I'm sick and tired of blocking Telnet. It's stupid. I'm just not going to do it today. I'm not blocking Telnet. Heck, I'm not blocking anything. I'm just forget it. Okay, that never happens. Firewalls don't have moods. Although those of you who probably manage firewalls would probably say different. People have moods. People are the reason a firewall passes traffic it shouldn't. People are the reason applications are poorly coded and have weaknesses in them. People are the reason patches don't get applied. People implement processes that they then don't follow. It's people that are the root of everything that goes wrong pretty much in the entire world. But in information security, that's definitely true. So we have to begin our program by thinking about people. So information security is fundamentally a people-centric problem, with technology and process helping in that. The next principle that is relevant is that the threat of an insider, the insider threat, the chance that an employee in the organization is going to cause a serious breach is indirectly related to their engagement with the organization. So what that means is as the threat rises, their engagement decreases. Or more appropriately, as their engagement decreases, the threat rises. Employees that are not engaged, that don't care about your company, about the organization, about the business, are inherently more likely to cause a breach through their actions or inactions, through their lack of concern, through the fact that they just don't care. And therefore, they're more likely to create a breach either inadvertently or not, or intentionally. So employee engagement is a critical component of mitigating the insider threat. And you can implement all the web gateways and CrowdStrikes and Palo Altos in the world, and that isn't going to fundamentally change whether an employee is engaged or not. And so ultimately, it's all about engaging employees, because engaged employees reduce risk. Now, you say, okay, well, how do you engage employees? Well, that ultimately is a factor of leadership, as well as policies and practices. It's all sort of part of that, but it begins with good leadership. If you have good, strong, effective leaders with a mission and a vision, with passion, who can drive, who can deliver authenticity, and that they have policies and practices that align with that, you will naturally get employee engagement. So, on those principles, we can then start to talk about, well, what's our workforce like today, and how is that relevant to this conversation? So I want to start with a slide, next slide I'm going to show here, that I think is arguably one of the more important slides in this. And it's the sobering reality that a lot of us need to come to terms with. And it's the first of many sort of statistics that govern a lot of the principles we're going to talk about. As we start with this. By 2025, 75% of the workforce is going to be that guy, okay? Or somebody who looks just like him, right? It's going to be millennials, is really what we're trying to say here. Currently, millennials occupy a pretty significant portion, in fact, the largest portion of the workforce. In the United States, millennials comprise about 53 million people in the workforce, compared to about 50 million Gen Xers, which is my generation. And we'll talk a little bit about the generations in a minute. Baby boomers comprise a significantly smaller percentage, but the key thing about boomers, about 15 million incidentally, but the key thing about baby boomers is that 20,000 baby boomers are leaving the workforce every day, while 30,000 millennials are entering the workforce every day. Now, we couldn't have a good comprehensive conversation about the generations without some overly generalizing, pandering section to each of the generations. Now, who am I to break with tradition? So let's get started with the overgeneralized, pandering section. We begin with our friends, the baby boomers. So this generation, as I mentioned before, is leaving the workforce pretty rapidly right now. And by 2025, there pretty much will be no baby boomers left in the workforce. So I've read a lot of statistics and values and numbers and data, and I can't tell you how many reports I've read about all the different generations. And the problem with them is that you start reading all the superlatives and adjectives they assign to all the various generations, and at some point they all kind of sound ridiculous. Everybody sounds wonderful and awful at the same time. What I tried to do is I said, okay, what is a key uniting principle behind each generation? What is something that is a unifying principle that is relevant to information security? And when I think about baby boomers and their generation, what the word and the concept that comes to mind is respect. This is a generation with a different value system, a system that demands and expects respect. They want to be respected. They expect others to respect the processes and policies of the organization. So respect is an anchoring principle for baby boomers. And the way to connect with baby boomers, in my experience and in what much of the research says, is to show respect to them. Show respect to their experience, their longevity, their knowledge, their ability to and all the other sort of positives that they have. But understanding that this is a generation that's leaving the the workplace, so we need to kind of tap them for their knowledge and expertise before they all leave. Which then gets kind of to the next generation, which is my generation. This is the Gen Xers. We were born in the 60s and 70s. And believe me, there's plenty of superlatives about my generation. I will say I really love this picture because I think this very much captures how a lot of us Gen Xers kind of feel. We feel a little trapped between two pretty large generations. And more importantly, we are now the leaders and taking over the leadership roles in most organizations. But when I think about my generation and I think about the other people who I know, we have a unifying principle, which is this notion of freedom. We want the freedom to tinker. We want the freedom to try new things. We want the freedom to grow and expand as people and as individuals. We're all about agility as a generation. So as we assume these leadership roles and as we manage and handle more Gen Xers in the workforce as well, we have to figure out strategies that give us and people like us that freedom that we want. Okay, so that then gets us to our our bearded friend here, the millennials. This guy's great. I love him. Look at that smiling face. So when I think about millennials, and believe me, the research on millennials is copious, to say the least. There's so much about them, and I mean, we could spend probably 4 hours talking about that generation. But there is really a unifying principle that I've come to learn in working with millennials and researching the generation, which is this kind of mystical notion of authenticity. Millennials really want an authentic work experience. They don't want the traditional hierarchy. They don't like the process and formality and structure. They're really all about a work experience that feels authentic, that they can believe in what the organization is doing. And I can say that the millennials I know and that have worked with and are very successful really truly embody this in many different ways. They like constant feedback. They like to be engaged. They like leaders that are coaches and work side by side with them rather than in sort of a hierarchy. But there's a lot of other details and facts about millennials, and millennials, whether we like it or not, are taking over, and therefore our next generation security program is going to have to essentially be centered around millennials because they're going to be the largest portion of the workforce, and they're the ones that our security program has got to reach out to. So when we start talking about millennials, there's some other interesting statistics that have gleaned from all my research that I think is very relevant. Number one, millennials are one of the most educated generations there's ever been. And I have to admit, this is somewhat of a surprising statistic when I first saw it. I kind of didn't believe it at first, but I double-checked it. This is a generation who's kind of done the right thing. They've invested in education. They haven't tried to skirt it. They haven't tried to get around it. They've tried to genuinely learn all the right things to do. And so because of that, you've got a generation of well-educated people who know the basics. They're not stupid. Let's put it that way. I know it's easy for a lot of us older generations to just kind of dismiss them. This is not a stupid generation by any sense of the word. Here's another interesting statistics. 56%, I think this is actually a little low, will reject a job from a company that bans social media. Now, this is an important concept because what it essentially says is they don't care about your need to block social media. They're just not going to work for you. So if you have a policy, well, we don't allow none of that Facebook and Snapchatting around here, this is a business organization. A lot of the millennial employees that you're trying to recruit are going to say, I don't care. I'm not working for you. If you're going to ban Facebook, fine. Go hire somebody else. And this is important because it means you're not going to be able to recruit these people with those kinds of policies. And social media bans is really only one dimension of that. It gets deeper, as you go down that rabbit hole. Here's another interesting statistic. 45% will choose flexibility over pay. Now, I got to say, all the research I've done as a leader, as a CEO, I've come to realize that pay is really one of the worst metrics for engagement. There's this notion, I think a lot of people think, well, if we just pay people more, they'll be more engaged. And actually, every single shred of research says almost exactly the opposite. Paying people more does not necessarily engage them more. Now, I know you're probably all thinking, well, I wouldn't mind a raise. Well, yeah, I wouldn't mind one either. But I got a terrible boss, let me just tell you. We all want to make more money, but it isn't about money. And particularly, I will say, working with millennials, it isn't all about money. They want that authentic work experience. Praise, feedback, these other things, flexibility, ability to work from home, all of these things are frankly part of the totality of their employment. And as an information security professional, we need to think about this. We need to think that it isn't just about giving them more money that's going to keep them engaged. It's about policies and practices that encourage or allow flexibility. Now, that's probably horrifying you as a security professional, at least some of you. I know it doesn't. It did me at first. But that isn't the one that really, truly horrified me. This next statistic really gets me, which is 73% expect to modify or customize their work computer. And when I mean customize, I don't mean put stickers on it. I mean, they want to be able to run their own software their own way. They want to configure it their way. Now, of course, if you're an information security professional, you hear that and you're like, oh, that's horrifying. We can't have that. You know, that's terrible. That's the worst thing in the world for information security. Well, the reality is this is another case where the people coming into the workforce are going to say, I don't care. I don't care that you have a policy that I can't install software. If I can't use the software I need to be successful, I'm not working here. I'm going to go somewhere else. I'm going to go to a place that's going to allow me to do it the way I want to do it and allow me to be successful in the ways I want to do it. And now we could sit here and say, well, that's just, cross our arms and be kind of militant about it and say, well, we're just going to have to learn. It's not going to work. So this is probably one of the most significant challenges we have. How do we build security programs, controls, and practices that are going to allow this level of flexibility? And believe me, that isn't easy. The next key statistic I want to cite, and I think probably the most important one for any of us who are in leadership roles, is this notion that pretty much all millennials have said, or at least 74% of them have said, leadership is key to engagement. They are looking for leaders who are authentic, who are real, who are working with them, collaborative, who embrace some of these new ideas and these new way of looking at things. So leadership is where all of this begins. And it's important to understand that leadership can exist at any level in an organization. It isn't necessarily just being a CEO or a director. You can be a security professional with 3 bosses or 4 bosses above you and still be a leader for the organization. So leadership is something that is going to help drive this engagement. Okay, so what's our real problem here, right? We get it, millennials, right? Got it, flexibility. Okay, what's the real problem that we're talking about? Okay, problem number 1. Pretty much everybody is having successful attacks. Okay, I think 90% is kind of low here, right? Everybody's getting attacked. Breaches are all over the place. We all know that. Okay, so that's problem number 1. We also know that these breaches are expensive. They cost a lot of money. I mean, if you're in the retail business, okay, you're practically getting a discount. But if you're in a healthcare business, right, you know a breach in your organization can be painful, to say the least. It's expensive, it's time-consuming, it causes scrutiny. I mean, we all know that these breaches, they can cause you to lose your job. Okay, so what's our answer, right? We know we're getting attacked. We know breaches are happening all over the place. We know the workforce is changing, right? So what's our grand answer to this state? Well, so far, the only answer we see out there in the marketplace is that people just keep buying more and more and more and more and more. They keep buying appliances and racks filled with this and cloud-enabled that and consoles and eye candy and dials that blink and dink and dork and all these spectacular boxes and next generations thises and that's and cloud-enabled hybrid controlling anti-denial of service malware instructional blah. You just keep buying equipment. More and more and more of it. And the VARs and the resellers just keep pushing us. Well, if you don't have one of these next generation big box, you're not going to be secure. You're going to be hacked. They're all going to take you over. So we just keep buying more and more and more gear. And it doesn't work. It isn't working, obviously. And I can tell you, a lot of the leaders that I talk to, they're pretty frustrated with buying more gear. And this is one of the many reasons why Anitian got out of the VAR business, because it's miserable. But more importantly, the buying of gear just doesn't work. Okay, so what's the next thing we do, right? We keep buying gear, and then we write policies, and we write these utterly ridiculous, stiff, boring. I pulled this. This is actually a real example. I took away the name of the company, but I mean, if you read this horrible thing, it's completely unreadable. The following document outlines guidelines for the use of computing systems located around the supermarket. The definition of the I mean, I got 3 sentences into this thing, and I'm like, I don't even care, right? Do you honestly think millennials are going to read this? They're not. They're just simply not going to read them. And it doesn't matter if this is the most perfectly written policy, perfectly aligns with every inconceivable, framework and compliance. It doesn't matter. If it isn't read, then it isn't going to be followed. And to top it all off, then we try to get people engaged in information security. And what do? We overwhelm them with data and statistics and values and principles and policies and processes and workflows and justifications. And I've watched some of these programs, and these people, they get up on stage and they wave their hands around, and it's boring. It's just boring. It isn't engaging for people, because it's kind of one of these, okay, so what? What does this mean to me, right? Fascinating. Malware, you don't have a good firewall, blah, 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 blah. Okay, fascinating. What does it mean to me? You have a problem. That's your problem. So these programs, they're boring. Well, this ultimately, as we, as our sort of customer base, or as our user base sort of disengages further and further, we in information security start getting kind of more indignant. And that leads to this sort of this enforcement mentality. There's a lot of people in information security that like to swagger into meetings and slap themselves down on the chair. No, that's not going to happen. We're not going to be doing any of that. No, it's not allowed. Not allowed. There's clearly policy that does not allow that. We will not be having any of that fun and computing stuff. No, not allowed. Absolutely, totally unallowed. And they shake their fists at this guy. Can you believe those stupid users? They don't understand. You're all dumb. You don't get it. And guess what? The users, the employees, are like, don't care, buddy. I don't care. I'm not interested. Because you got all these people talking. Nobody's listening. And if they don't care, they're like, dude, whatever. I'm downloading it. I'm doing my job. You go froth in the corner, buddy. Don't care. But it's you have to align to internationally accepted steps. Don't care, buddy. Don't flippin' care. You and your policies can go pound sand. And I know you're thinking, well, they have to obey. They're not going to. And the harder and stronger and more you try to force policy on people, the less they're going to engage. And what that then ultimately creates is this sort of paranoia amongst us security people. Because somewhere along the line, security teams seem to have gotten this notion that the only way you can do cybersecurity is some grand army of information security. This notion that we can build this like Death Star of cybersecurity, and with one grand swift stroke we will cut out all the hackers and blow everything up, and everybody will be perfectly secure. And that's not actually how businesses and organizations work. Quite frankly, they're a lot more like an Ewok party, Hey, it's beer 30, let's upload everything to Pastebin. Dancing Ewoks. How many presentations have you seen recently with dancing Ewoks? Not very many, I bet. Okay, so I know at this point you're like, oh gosh, Andrew, this is pretty depressing. It's never going to work, right? The harder I try, the more forceful I am, the more I try to justify the policies, the more I try to align them and get them correct and they sounding official, it never seems to work. So what's the answer? Well, there is hope, and the hope is what this whole presentation is about, this next generation security program, kind of mixing my sci-fi metaphors here. You get the Death Star, now we're moving on to Star Trek here. we need to build a new program, a new way to build a program. What does that mean? So first off, we have to balance certain things. First off, we've got to balance our need for security, classic principles of availability, confidentiality, integrity, and of course compliance. So that's kind of on one side of this balancing act. And on the other side, we've got to be able to balance things like respect, freedom, authenticity, and the mission of the business. Those first three sound familiar? Those are the first three principles of engaging each of the various generations. So we've got to figure out a way to make our policies respectful, provide a certain degree of freedom, and also have an authenticity to them. And I would say authenticity is probably one of the most important principles here. They've got to feel real. They've got to feel like something I can believe in. And that comes tying to them the mission. So let's dig a little deeper into that. What are we really talking about? Number one, you've got to be able to give people meaning. You've got to convey importance and make people care about your policies. If you write them in these stiff, third-party, distant sort of ways, that doesn't convey meaning. It doesn't connect with people. If I say to you, you must protect, these things and you must do this, that's one thing. But if I say, hey, this is important to us, we need to work together to protect patients or our customers or the world or our community, and I need you to protect that, well, that's a very different kind of statement. So finding ways to bring meaning to this, which really also gets to finding ways to make it personal. If we can connect with people at a isn't that a great picture, by the way? I love this guy, the hugging. I really want to hug that tiger. Anyways, if we can find ways to hug tigers, no, if we can find ways to connect with people and make it so it becomes their policy. Because if I tell you to do something, that's me telling you, and you don't own that. The first thought in your head isn't, thanks, Andrew, if I tell you to go do something. It's probably, flip you, Andrew, okay? Because that's the way humans are wired. When we're told to do something, we generally don't like it, okay? But if we're told a good idea and then we kind of make it our own, or we're told that there's a grand principle at stake here and we need your involvement, well, that's different. Now it's about me. Now it's about something I need to do to get involved in this. And the key to that is to make these things social. We have to integrate security into every dimension of the workplace. We got to kind of make it like a smartphone, right? So we have these, you get your iPhone or your Android with you all the time. It's always there. You need something, you just go look it up. It's there. It's with you all the time. Well, it's with me all the time, and that's a different problem. But we have these smartphones with us all the time, and so they allow us to kind of connect with people. Well, our security program needs to do the same thing. We need to be able to connect with people and make it a social entity. And lastly, we've got to be able to make it agile. We have to be able to adapt to the business and not the other way around. The security team's got to be telling the business how to do things. We have to, as the security people, we have to figure out how to adapt to their needs. Okay, great, sounds wonderful. So what does that really mean? Well, in this next section, I want to kind of dig down another layer deeper, and I want to talk about what do we really need to do that? So what are some more tangible steps? Because at this point, it's been a lot of theory and a lot of concept. And so I want to talk about some very tangible things you can do to start improving and start building this next generation security program. And don't worry, at the end of this, if these 10 are overwhelming, I boil that down even further into like bulleted list you can just follow. But let's start with this. And here's kind of a quick overview of each of the sort of things or tactical tasks you can do. We'll walk through each one of these. So let's start with the first one. Good old start with why. There's a great video that really was very transformational in sort of my experience as a CEO, which is Simon Sinek's Start With Why video. I would encourage all of you to go watch this video. Now, Simon talks about marketing and how to market products, but he has a very clean and very great principle, which is people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. And I think this principle translates very well to information security, which is people are not going to follow a policy because of what it is. They're going to follow a policy because of why it's there. They're going to follow a security practice because they believe in it, not because they have to do it. So any way we can connect our program to a greater mission, a greater ethic, a greater principle of the organization is going to connect deeper with people. And one of the simplest ways you can do that, one of the easiest and fastest ways you can do that is to put the reader into each policy. So this is what I call the you principle. Most security policies today, when you read them, they're written in the third person, right? Employees will, prevent the disclosure of EPHI. When you write in the third person, the reader reads that in the third person, which means they hear in their head, employees will do something. And it's very easy to disassociate yourself from that and say, well, that doesn't apply to me. That applies to those employees over there. That's not me. I'm not that person. So this policy doesn't apply to me. It's very easy to take anything written in the third person and see it as applying to somebody else, because that's essentially how it's written. It's written as if these other people are going to do it. And it doesn't read as well, versus if you write in the second person, which a lot of us I know were trained not to do. You were trained from a business perspective, don't ever write you, don't ever address the reader directly. Wrong. You absolutely should. When we do that, you bring the reader directly into the policy. So this example I have here, let's make a difference. We need your help. You're addressing the reader directly. You can help. Keep confidential off your email. If you don't have it, it can't be stolen, and you're safe. When I read that in my head as a reader, it's addressing me specifically. It's not about some distant person. It's me. So this is all about how to connect with that why, is connect things to that bigger mission and address people directly in your policies and in your program. It's one of the simplest and most effective ways you will connect with millennials in a much better way, is take your policies and just connect them to that bigger mission. Next thing we need to do is automate. Millennials love automation. So do hackers, incidentally. Hackers and the malware community has embraced automation in every conceivable possible way. We need to automate. Millennials are very comfortable with automation because they've kind of grown up with it. And for most of us Gen Xers, we're pretty comfortable with it as too. And it's a simple sort of principle of sociology that's happened, is that in the last 10 to 20 years, we have automated a lot of the sort of social interactions that we have. And we have automated platforms. And for millennials, that's kind of seen as a good thing. It seems weird to them when you don't automate, because it's like, why wouldn't we automate this? It just makes sense to them. So security needs to be automated. What does that mean? It means putting automation principles pretty much everywhere throughout your security controls. Auto-blocking, auto-responding, auto-scanning, auto-remediating, basically making where everything happens automatically. You don't rely on a person to sit there and have to check and click everything off. Because for millennials, that's seen as kind of busy work. Why would I do that when I can make the computer do it for me? And I got to say, from a security consultant perspective, I don't know why you wouldn't do that either, because it makes your people do things that are more important. They're not sitting around manually patching things and manually reviewing logs. Put the technology to work. And this is only going to increase in the next few years. Automation is taking over. There's great automation and orchestration platforms. I would encourage all of you to look at something like Phantom. There's other ones, Hexalite, Swimlane, etc. But Phantom is way cool. I love them. But these automation technologies are just increasing sort of at an exponential rate. If you look at what's going on in the cloud, like AWS, I mean, AWS is, you can almost completely fully automate your entire environment. And millennials coming into your workspace are going to them, this is like cool and normal, and why wouldn't you do it? So you need to automate. It's a core principle of the next generation security program. The next step of all of this is to just simply say a lot less. Okay? People don't read. I'm sorry. I don't care how great or smart your policies are. They're just not going to get read. And this is a principle I tell consultants at Anitian all the time. It doesn't matter how right you are. It doesn't matter how smart you are. It doesn't matter how much you know and how eloquently you're able to blather on at length about that. If people don't listen to you or they don't read what you wrote, all of your intelligence, all of your brilliance, all of your great ideas is completely wasted. You might as well have not even said anything. So it's all about how do you take all those principles and strategies and policies and things that PCI and HIPAA mandate and get people to understand them. And the simplest way to do that is just say it. Quit beating around the bush, blathering about all manner of theories and concepts, and just tell people what they can and can't do. For example, if you have a policy where people cannot plug in personal devices, don't write some long-winded, blathering justification filled with theoretical documents and white papers from SANS. Just say, don't plug things into the network. It's dangerous. Okay, that's not complicated. We can understand that. Likewise, we have a big problem in information security right now with eye candy dashboards. These dashboards that have blinking lights and beeping things, and they got all these. I'm waving my hands. You guys can't see that, of course, from the webinar. And we buy these things and we put them up on big screens in security or network operation centers, and we all stand around and we stare at these screens with all these colorful graphs, and we all say, yes, 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 look at my amazing and impressive SOC screen there. Look at there's a dial, it's going back and forth, and there's a picture, a world map with little things, you know, pew 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 maps. Isn't that impressive? And invariably, some smart ass like me comes in and says, okay, well, what does all this mean? What does this tell you? I have no idea what it means. It tells me nothing. But it sure is impressive. And I'm like, so you just spent $100,000 to have this eye candy in your knock, and it tells you nothing? Wow, that's a giant waste of money. So same principle here, which is you don't need a bunch of eye candy to make a point. Less is often more. There's some very simple technical improvements you can do that will deliver a tremendous amount of benefit. For example, like a core firewall. If you don't have a core firewall in your environment, or a core next-gen firewall, or some way to segment your network, that's a very simple technical improvement you can do that doesn't require a lot of eye candy. More importantly, I should add, and I threw this sort of in here, is don't buy anything unless you have the people to run it. Okay? All right, so let's move on to our next principle, which is roll with it. You need to get your organization to understand that change is going to be the natural order of things moving forward. It just is. Getting a new perspective, being able to change, and this is a principle we have at Anitian, which is this idea of just rolling with it. Okay? When something changes, accept that that's okay. It's okay to change. You need that ability. If a policy needs to be changed, change it right then and there. Changing vendors is a good thing too. I realize this to some extent is, you know, I'm one of those vendors, or Anitian's one of those vendors sometimes, but you really should get a different perspective. All of us security vendors and other vendors you may work with, we have different ways of looking at things. Those differing perspectives can be valuable. I'll be honest with you, sometimes our perspective might not be the perspective you want, although I wouldn't see how it couldn't be. But the same principle applies to like new technologies, okay? You're going to need new technologies, but have a process to evaluate those and be able to sort of change at a whim and not get stuck sort of buying things that don't align with your policies, that don't align with what the intent of this improvement and change is. Next principle I would say is this notion of kind of opening the kimono. This is the transparency principle. It's a big idea in leadership right now, this idea of being very open, very transparent, sharing with people. A lot of us information security people have sort of been improperly trained to believe that everything needs to be hidden and controlled. And while there is, of course, confidentiality as a principle of protecting, there's a limit to what confidentiality is really intended to do. Yes, PHI, payment card data, these are things that are meant to be confidential. But your security program should not be a confidential document per se. You see customers all the time, they're always worried about leaking data out, and in the process of leaking data, they spend too much time trying to control everything. And that doesn't really work when you're trying to engage people. There's a great book that I'd encourage all of you to read called The Speed of Trust. It's another sort of seminal book in my experience becoming a leader, and it talks about the ability to share openly and honest, and also being honest when you can't share. But it also is about really being brutally honest with your employees about things that are going on. And I think this gets to that privacy issue. You need to face the reality, and this is something that, you come to work at Anitian, I'm very honest with you, we can read your email. You don't have any privacy here. There's no such thing as privacy in this world anymore. And you can say, well, there's rights and government or whatever. You work at a corporation, you have no privacy, and you should just be honest with your employees. Why hide it? Why try to obfuscate it? Because the minute you obfuscate it, you make the employee think you're up to something. If an employee comes to you and says, can you guys read my email? If you shy away, well, I'm not allowed to discuss that issue with you. You know what my first thought is as an employee? You're up to something. You're doing something. I don't trust you. Whereas if you say, of course I can read your email. This is a company. Come on, let's face it. I can read your email. Don't worry about it. There's nothing in it. I don't care. Right? It's an honest and it's an authentic statement. And people might not always like that, but that breeds an authenticity in the organization. What this also means from a technology perspective is you kind of need to monitor everything, log everything, and watch everything. Put it in the cloud, test and test and test again. If you want to build a good, strong program, you need to be monitoring pretty much everything that goes on in the organization. And cloud is the ideal way to do this. You put things at AWS or Azure or whatever, you can monitor every tiny little activity. User behavior analytics is a great new emerging technology that can allow you to do this. And you should. You should monitor every user interaction in the organization. And if people want privacy, they can walk into the parking lot and just be honest about that. That Anitian, you come to work for us, you have two phones. You got a work phone, you got a personal phone. What you do on your personal phone, I don't care. It's your business. What you do on a work phone, every last thing is going to be monitored there. Period. That's the way it's going to be. There's no mystery. There's no, we've made a very clear separation, and that principle should apply to you guys as well. That ability to sort of separate and say, this is us, we're monitoring, that is you, do whatever you want in your personal life. Which really gets to that next sort of issue, this notion of how do you become more authentic. And it's getting rid of those stiff, distant, pontificating policies. It's about engaging with people. It's about building authentic leadership in the organization. One of the things we like to call this is kind of the perception gradient that exists in an organization. Your words and your behavior need to align. And that's a big problem we see in a lot of companies is they will write these grandiose policies and practices and procedures. They'll have all these well-aligned, perfectly intentioned security programs, but then the minute somebody like us comes in and looks at it, we're like, okay, well, are you following any of these? Oh, no. I'm too important to follow those policies. I am a big, important, big-time person here. Policies don't apply to me. And it's like, wait a minute, your words and your behaviors don't align. And that makes me not trust you. Your behaviors, your actions, your activities, all of this kind of needs to align. And what that really manifests as is be very open about the controls you have. Don't hide them. Don't be mysterious about them. Just say it. We do it this way. This is the reason why. And that gets back to that sort of transparency principle. But also being conspicuously vocal in your opposition to checkbox auditing. Now, this is a big issue, I think, for a lot of millennials, because when you bring millennials and you bring a younger generation into the workforce and you tell them, look, just check all this nonsense off, just make it go away, just get rid of this. This is just stupid, dumb security stuff. What you're essentially telling these people is, we lie. We lie at this company. Lying is okay here. We're all about lying and misdirecting other people, which I can tell you a lot of millennials will say, I don't want to be a part of that. I don't care that you're trying to save 1/1 billionth of a penny on every order so that your stock price can tick up 1/10 of a percent. That's meaningless to me. Because you're telling me to lie, I don't respect you now. And if I don't respect you, I'm not going to follow your policies. You write a policy that says protect EPHI, I don't care because I don't respect you as a leader because you just told me to lie. So being very conspicuously vocal about not lying and being authentic is critical to keeping that engagement high. The next step is really to socialize security. Using peer pressure to get people to follow policies. This is a great strategy, actually. I've started using this a lot, which is rather than telling people what to do, ask them what the rest of the company would think of something, right? So rather than saying, I need you to do this, you turn around and say, do you think your coworkers would be okay with that? Would they be comfortable with you, leaving EPHI or emailing it around? Do you think they'd be okay with that? Do you think that sounds all right? So it's the idea is using the social environment as a mechanism of enforcement. Because if you tell somebody what to do, then it's you telling them. But if they're social, if they're friends, if their peers are all doing it, well, then they'll naturally do it. Then you don't need to tell them what to do. The other piece of this is using feedback to gather intelligence. Millennials expect and want constant feedback. You should constantly be engaging with the people in your organization, using things like feedback platforms or surveys or any sort of way to allow open and transparent feedback. I threw a couple of companies up here that offer this, like 15Five or Tiny Pulse. They're two platforms you can use to disseminate ideas and get immediate feedback. Another principle I would say is looking to gamify policy acceptance. There's a great presentation I saw from RSA last year. It was the head of security for Uber, did about gamifying policy acceptance. The U.S. Army has done gamification for the last few years, and it's caused dramatic improvement in acceptance of policies. What is gamification? Basically means taking your policies and turning it into a game, providing badges and certificates and other cool things like that to get people to do them and be able to be proud of what they've done. You've achieved level 5 and fought the big boss, and you get this Starbucks card, or you get this badge, or you get these these kinds of things. Again, for some of us, and I'll be honest with you, I'd say, that's stupid. Who cares about that kind of dumb stuff? But the truth is, when you grew up on video games, those kind of achievements actually are important. Okay? And last, I would say is that you need to build a culture of security. So security responsibilities need to be put into all job descriptions. Anybody in your organization says security is not part of their job is probably somebody you should be looking to get rid of, okay? Or get it into their job description. Everybody needs to be in on this. You would need to require security awareness training for everybody in the organization, and you need to figure out how to make it interesting and fun. If security awareness is some boring, online, stupid thing they have to watch where there's some monotone nitwit standing up there going, our security program is globally provides you important rules you must follow. If it's something like that, they're not. First off, if they do it, they're not going to learn anything. And secondly, if they do it, they're not going to care. And quite frankly, it's probably going to make them disrespect you. So it's important that whatever you do, you find people, you find ways to do that is dynamic, that's engaging, that uses gamification, something like that. Moving toward unified platforms with integrated defenses is also a key part of this. So building security in kind of every dimension of your security infrastructure. And a lot of the technologies are moving this way. You heard about, Marty Roche at RSA this year talked about this notion, last year, I should say, talked about this notion of detect anywhere, defend everywhere. You've got Fortinet and their security fabric technologies. You've got security orchestration. You've got security analytics technologies. All of these are all about kind of integrating security into every dimension of your organization and making this kind of culture of security. Okay, so we're at the very end here. I have just a couple last little slides. And then, of course, if you guys want to ask questions, we're right about at the end of our time. So I haven't seen any questions yet. So I'm just going to finish with these last few slides, and then we can call it a day. So we've already accepted that every breach kind of begins and ends with people. We understand that people are the key to building a strong information security program. We also understand that the people are kind of the biggest threat you have, too. The employees at your organization represent the largest threat you face. Hackers, China, Russia, Putin, they're all threats, too, varying degrees, depending on what you believe the CIA is saying. But the people in your organization fundamentally are one of the biggest threats you have, because if they don't care and they don't engage, they can do a lot more damage than Putin ever could. Okay? Poor Putin, I'm picking on him today. So if people are the root of all the breaches, we understand they're the most important. We also understand that they're the biggest threat to your business. So why on earth are we putting things like this in charge of our information security? Why are we letting boxes or software kind of mandate where we go? And I'm picking on poor Palo Alto and McAfee here, which they probably deserve it. But why are we letting them run the show, right? I'm not saying they're not important, but, or more importantly, why are we letting things like PCI and HIPAA mandate everything to us? And again, I'm not saying they're not important and we don't need to comply to them, but this shouldn't run the show for us. This isn't about people. This is about aligning, meeting requirements. Again, requirements important. I'm not trying to dismiss that. But this isn't about people. Or why are we letting this guy run our security program? Some cheesy sales guy. Hey, how's it going there? What's it going to take to get you into them Palo Altos? You like them? Yeah, let's do this thing. Let's do a deal, buddy. Why are we letting guys like this run the show for us? When our workforce is this gang of iPad watching folks, right? This is the nicest millennial image I can find, by the way. Okay, the security program of the future is built around people. It isn't built around the products you have. It isn't built around PCI or HIPAA compliance. It isn't built around whatever your VAR has told you is the next cool thing. It's built around the people in your organization and leveraging tools, technologies, practices, policies, and engagement to get there. Because ultimately what this comes down to is you're either going to adapt or you're going to have a breach. And if you have a breach, you're probably going to lose your job. So the question is, are you going to adapt or are you going to allow the breach to happen? All right. So with that, I will leave you with one last slide. And again, if you guys have any questions, it's a good time to ask them. Nobody's asking questions, so I'm going to take that as a good thing. That was a lot of information, right? And you're probably like, too much, Andrew. I get it. This is a complicated thing, and I only had an hour to present it to you. To be honest, I probably could have gone on for another couple hours on this. So here's an action plan. If you're not sure what to do and you're just sort of like way too much, do these 10 things, and that'll get you moving in the right direction. Number one, get a risk assessment performed of your organization, a real one that's got technical testing, one that actually looks at your organization and your culture, not some nonsensical checkbox thing, or not something you fill out online. I mean a real honest risk assessment of your organization. Go back, rewrite all your policies, hyper-simplify them, put them in the second person. It's the simplest thing you can do. It's the simplest way you can start dragging or deriving better engagement out of people. Start finding ways to automate security in any way you can. Best way, automate patching. If you don't have an automated patch management program, I mean, come on, seriously? It's 2017 now. You can automate patching. So figure out any way you can automate. Figure out a way to take your monitoring and increase it and log everything everywhere. This should make your Splunk salesperson very happy, or your Q1, or your Logarithm, or whatever your SIM provider is. You need to log everything, and you need to keep those logs, and you need to have them somewhere. Figure out some way to take a security awareness program and kind of gamify it. Badges, certificates, Starbucks cards, it doesn't matter. Figure out some way to turn it into some kind of small game for people so that they feel a sense of accomplishment when they get it done. Maybe creating tests or other things. There's a lot of ways you can do that. There's a lot of great advice out there. Number 6 is classic advice from Anitian, which is please just stop talking to technology VARs, okay? Don't get me wrong, you're going to need to buy technology, but don't let VARs drive this process, okay? You need to remember this is a people-centric way. Figure out how you can allow people to customize their end devices and publish those rules for all to see. The rules of customization should be on the walls. They should be on the internet portals. They should be when people are newly hired, they should get a paper that says, here's what you can do with your laptop. We're okay if you deploy software. We're okay with this, but you've got to protect the system. Don't do this. We're going to have these other controls in place. Be really clear about what the boundaries are and what you're going to allow them to do. Rewrite all the job descriptions in your organization and have an information security requirement in every job description. And by that I mean everybody from the CEO to the gardener. It doesn't matter who it is. Everybody needs to have that in their job description. Everybody needs to be involved in that process. As part of your security awareness program, implement a feedback process. Get people telling you what's going on. One of the best sources of intelligence you have is your very people. Get them to tell you what's wrong. They will tell you what's wrong. People are naturally inclined to do the right thing, so use that to your benefit. If you have a way for them to anonymously tell you something or tell you something without the fear of retribution from leadership or other people, that is an outstanding system and you need that. So figure out how you can get that feedback system put in there so that your employees can tell you where there's potential information security problems. And lastly, push your security operations away from a reaction focus to more of an analysis focus. If all they're doing is reacting to alerts and things coming in, that isn't going to be a very effective program. They need to be doing analysis of data and analyzing the trends and the things going on. Okay, so with that, as again I see we don't have any questions, I'm going to go ahead and say thank you for all of you attending today. I appreciate you taking the time. And I want to thank Isaka Willamette Valley for letting us do this webinar. Sorry we missed it last week because of the snow here in Portland. If you do have any questions or comments or concerns about this presentation, please feel free to reach out to me. I'd be happy to answer your questions or talk about these concepts or ideas. Slides are available on our SlideShare. If you just hit that link down there, that bit.ly/Anitian, that'll take you right to our SlideShare. You can download a copy of the slides from there. You're also welcome to reach out to myself or anybody at the Anitian team, and we'll send you a copy or a link to the slides. Again, thank you very much for attending today. I appreciate it. It's been great, and have a happy holidays, everybody, and a great 2017.